Welcome to The Reformed Athlete. It is Coach KP, and this is the home for helping former and future athletes alike utilize the lessons that sport has all collectively taught us to create the best future possible. Now let's get right into the episode. Welcome back, guys. It is day 3 of the 10-day podcast series. If you have not caught episodes 1 and 2, definitely start there because we're doing this in a very chronological order, so you guys are going to understand that days 1 and 2 are absolutely crucial if you're trying to make 2025 the year of the athlete, which is my goal for all of you guys. Today we're going to go a little bit more educational. Today we're going to get a really good insight into the practical differences between training like an athlete and training like a bodybuilder. This is what my entire platform is built on and is dedicated to, and I would be doing you guys an absolute disservice if I did not go deep into detail into explaining the difference between these two disciplines and why it is so important to approach them differently depending on whatever your training goals are. Now, before I even get into this episode, guys, I'm gonna give a small disclosure here. If you hear this and you find yourself taking it personally, like you think I'm elevating one of these disciplines more than the other, because obviously I'm the train like an athlete girl, I'm past the bodybuilding days, I already had those. Listen to episode 1 if you want to hear about that. I am not comparing these two to each other, saying this one is so much better than this one. I'm simply letting you know that there's a difference, and depending on whatever your training goals are, depending on what aligns best with you, you then get to take this information and decide what decisions are going to be best for you and for your goals and reaching the levels of fitness that you want to achieve in and outside of the gym, depending on who you are. I'm obviously biased here. I love training like an athlete. It's what helped me rediscover my identity and my passion for fitness. So if any of my other former athletes are feeling the same way where they're bored in their bodybuilding workouts and they're just like, honest to God, I cannot do another set of 3 sets of 10 on leg press or I'm going to absolutely lose my mind. Yeah, I was there too. And that's when I discovered training like an athlete, and that's when I got my oomph back at the gym, and I'm hopefully going to help you do the same thing by explaining the difference between these two practices so that you can understand which aligns more with you. So what I'm going to do today to help you understand the differences between training like an athlete and training like a bodybuilder or a traditional gym rat is we're going to think about this like a side-by-side comparison chart, okay? So we're going to go over the qualities and then decide what the difference is depending on which discipline that you are following. So for example, in case that didn't make sense, we're going to start with goals, okay? This is a very important concept to understand when you're trying to determine, okay, should I train like an athlete? Should I train like a bodybuilder? Let's figure out which aligns more with your goals. So when we're thinking about the goals of a traditional bodybuilder, a traditional gym rat, this is somebody that has the goal of getting a very specific physique. For bodybuilding specifically, this is someone that wants a very lean physique. They want a lot of toned definition to their muscles, and their entire goal is to get a very specific reflection or aesthetic adaptation out of their body. When you're training like an athlete, your goal is a bit more performance oriented, okay? Athletes want to be able to perform at whatever their respective sport is. So when we take the concept of maybe you're no longer an athlete, but you still want to train like one, we're training for the qualities, for the adaptations that an athlete would have been training for. And examples of this would be for strength. Yes, bodybuilders and athletes alike both want to train for strength, but athletes might veer off into power, agility, mobility, conditioning. There's additional factors that an athlete is going to prioritize at the gym beyond just the way that they look. And before we get any further into that, let me just say, I don't know if you guys have ever gandered over at a professional athlete, but athletes have fire physiques. Athletes look good. So I don't want you thinking that if you have goals oriented around wanting to look good and wanting to feel good in how you look, you want your body to reflect your hard work. Just because you choose to train like an athlete doesn't make it vain if you're like, okay, but like I kind of want a booty too. Or you know what? These boulder shoulders, I want them jumping off the damn page. That's cool. You can actually have both. You can prioritize your performance in the things you want your body to do. In the instance of maybe wanting to run a half marathon, or you want to learn how to play rugby, or you're somebody that wants to get into ice hockey. You know, these are random examples. But if you have performance-based goals, you can still get a killer physique in the process. You're just not going to focus 100% of your attention on that physique. In the same note, a bodybuilder, while they are focusing almost entirely on their aesthetic and their physique in the gym and how their body is going to look as a result, that doesn't mean that they don't want to be able to do cool things outside of the gym too, okay? So there is an overlap in almost everything that I'm going to share here today, so use your best judgment there. This is not black and white. Nothing about fitness is black and white. There's so much gray area. We are just going to generally define the differences between these two. Again, this is an educational perspective. So given that the goals of an athlete are more performance-based, the goals of a bodybuilder are more aesthetic-based, is there anything morally better with one or the other? No. If you think that there is, then that's your own opinion. But there is absolutely nothing wrong or right inherently with training for aesthetics versus training for performance. Whatever connotation you have with that is something that you have created for yourself. Now, when we're thinking about the actual methodology to be able to accomplish these different types of training goals, this is where a lot of people get stuck. So when you're thinking about training like an athlete, you're thinking about using a dynamic functional movement perspective. So when I say that, what I mean is an athlete is somebody that wants their body to move cohesively as a unit as efficiently as possible. So in order to execute that, you're thinking about having a high priority on things called compound exercises. Compound exercises use multiple joints in your body at the same time. So that's kind of a over-sciencey way of saying that a lot of different parts of your body are moving at the same time to accomplish one goal. So if you're thinking about something like a squat, your ankle joints, obviously, because you're standing on your feet and you're going to bend your knees and your ankles are going to get used. Your knees, obviously your knees are the primary bender of this exercise. Your hips are also going to flex and extend or bend and straighten if you want to think about it that way. Your back is also involved because you're holding that barbell on your back extensors are being used, you're squeezing your shoulders, your whole body is engaged as a unit to accomplish this exercise that a lot of people kind of just think is a lower body exercise. You're using your whole body to engage in this exercise. Now, where this starts to become a little bit different from a bodybuilding exercise, or what would be most efficient for creating size on your muscles, is because a squat is a little bit more complicated on your central nervous system, because it requires a little bit more core strength and it requires your whole body to coordinate together better. You won't be able to lift as much raw weight from a barbell back squat, for example, as you would during a leg press. A leg press is an exercise where you're very isolated in that it's just your legs that are moving the weight, moving the resistance. And that's something that bodybuilders like to focus on, is isolated muscle group exercises. And the reason they like to do that is because typically when you focus on muscle group exercises, isolated muscle groups, you can get a better definition and focus out of that specific muscle group that you want to look a certain way. So a bodybuilder that wants to train for a specific physique and have their muscles look a certain way are going to benefit a lot more from exercises where you specifically can target this muscle to make it look this specific way, whereas an athlete that wants their body to move cohesively as a unit doesn't care as much about getting that extra, 5 to 10% muscle mass on that specific muscle group. They care more about how their body's going to function together. And while both can be incredibly strong and both can lift a buttload of weight, they just have a slightly different focus in the adaptation they're asking of their muscles given their exercise selection. So the first difference in terms of the methodology of training like an athlete versus a bodybuilder is the primary focus on compounds versus the primary focus on isolated muscle groups. Reminder, that does not mean they cannot do each other's. That does not mean a bodybuilder is not going to do compounds. Many do. That doesn't mean that an athlete isn't going to do isolated exercises. There's a ton of benefits to that too. We're just talking about the differences right now, the primary differences. Another thing in terms of the methodology is that an athlete is going to really, really highly prioritize their mobility and their warm-ups. The reason they have such a high emphasis on that is because mobility and activation in prehab exercises within the warm-up is something that's going to help prevent injuries when you're utilizing your body out in the real world beyond just the gym, also in the gym, but particularly for the performance outside of the gym. So if somebody is an athlete that has to run on a field, they want to make sure that they have really mobile, flexible, strong hamstrings. They want to make sure that their ankle mobility is good so they're not spraining their ankles, they're not causing unnecessary foot injuries. If you have an athlete that has a lot of overhead rotations, such as a swimmer or a baseball player, there's somebody that wants to do a lot of prehab and mobility work on their shoulder so that when they do these repetitious movements, they are making sure they are prioritizing their injury prevention and getting ahead of any potential injuries, knowing the risks that inherently come with the performance that they're trying to do. So athletes have a pretty heavy emphasis on this because they need their body to feel good. If the athletes are feeling stiff and cranky and achy all the time, they're not going to be able to execute what they want to be able to do. A bodybuilder obviously doesn't want to feel stiff and achy. However, it's not prioritized or emphasized, should I say, in the bodybuilding gym rat community to focus on your warm-ups and your mobility. It's more like, hey, we got a lot to do in this workout today. Let's bang this workout out. Don't worry about the warm-up. We just want to get to the workout and try to get as many exercises in as possible, because when we're focusing on hypertrophy and physique, you've got to get a lot of pump in. You've got to get a lot of reps and volume in. So there is kind of a cultural difference between these two, where you're thinking about the culture around training like an athlete versus the culture around bodybuilding, where they really prioritize injury prevention and they really prioritize how their body's going to feel and move outside of just the gym setting, whereas bodybuilders simply don't have that focus. For better or for worse, typically for worse, a lot of bodybuilders are really stiff. And it's not that they don't want to be doing these exercises. I think it's more just that it's not in the gym culture to do them. They don't think about it. Like if you buy a bodybuilding program from anybody online, any fitness influencer you can find that has the body that you dream of, you download their PDF, they're not having warm-ups. They don't have mobility and movement tissue preparation inside of their workouts. It's almost like a waste of time to them. And I have found that the people that work with me, like my one-on-one clients, my clients who are in my group coaching programs, like they come up to me and they're like, Coach KP, I had no idea how stiff I was before. I genuinely did not realize how big a difference it would make between having warm-ups and not having warm-ups. Like I've had 50 to 60-year-old clients being like, hey, I actually feel good working out, and I thought I was just old and stiff and cranky now. But now my body moves so well, and it's because of those warm-ups. They're always like, what are those things we do before the workout? And I'm like, it's going to change your life if you really commit to it. So that's one of the best things about training like an athlete, is that emphasis on the mobility and the injury prevention to get ready for the workout ahead. Another difference in the methodology between training like an athlete and training like a bodybuilder tends to lie in the adaptation that they want out of their muscles. So again, bodybuilders are like, we want hypertrophy, we want that toned physique, we want our muscles to scream off the page, whereas an athlete is like, okay, yeah, that would be cool, but I also really just want to be explosive. I want to run a lot faster. I want to be able to jump higher when I'm playing basketball at the recreation center. I want to be able to run faster when I'm playing pickup soccer, because all these 35-year-olds are beating my butt and I want to be able to keep up with them so that I can play in my under 40s league and feel confident about it. Or if you're like me and you're a fighter, you want to be able to quite literally pack a punch with your exercises, and that comes from specifically training your explosive strength. So something a bodybuilder is probably never going to think about is how much force they can generate from a medicine ball slam, or they're never going to think about how fast that they can do a push press at the gym, whereas an athlete wants to prioritize that at the beginning of the workout so that they can put the most effort into that. That's something that they really highly want to emphasize because it's so relevant to the demands of sport, or if you don't have a sport you're specifically training for, it's so relevant to just generally developing athletic qualities. Power and explosiveness is probably one of the biggest factors that I notice between these two subgroups of people that are training in the gym, is wanting power versus not really caring if they have power or not because it's not aligned with their goals. So that's a huge difference in the training methodology. And for those that don't know, I'll do a way more in-depth episode on this, but power training is basically how quickly you can move the most amount of weight. It's really all about your nervous system's ability to be efficient, to tell your muscles to get on the same page and lift as much weight as possible as quickly as humanly possible, and the way that that's going to translate into jumping and sprinting and being generally explosive with your movements, like punches, for example, it's going to translate really well over. Now, one of the final things that I wanted to recognize between these two methodologies that is different is that athletes want to focus on agility, whereas bodybuilders could never look at that again a day in their life, and they would be completely unbothered and their goals would not be impacted. This is one of those crossovers that simply does not exist. A bodybuilder does not need agility drills. An athlete definitely needs agility drills. And when I'm talking about agility, I'm talking about the ability to change direction really quickly. So let's say you're shuffling to the right really quickly. You want to be able to very quickly change direction and shuffle to the left. Or maybe a more relevant example is you're on a soccer field and you're running forward. Your team's got the ball. You guys are on offense, and then the other team steals it. And now the direction has changed, that they're on the counterattack, and you got to get your butt back on defense and support your team. You were moving forward. Now you got to quickly change directions to the other side of the field. And now maybe you're backtracking and you want to have the agility to be able to backtrack and move quickly. Or maybe you have to cut across the center of the field to cover somebody in the middle. And now you have to work on moving at an angle or moving laterally down the field. This is something where agility, changing direction quickly, is going to be important from a performance perspective, obviously. It's also going to be so important from an injury prevention standpoint. I'm sure most of you guys have heard of ACL tears, really, really common ligament to tear in your knee. Unfortunately, more common for women than for men, but it's a really common injury that is known primarily as a non-contact injury. It happens from a very quick change of direction. So training agility in the gym and working on changing direction quickly, working on moving in multiple planes of motion, not just forward and backward, but side to side, rotationally, all of these things, working on training these adaptations within the gym or within your training sessions is then going to translate outside of the gym much better. And this can even be relevant to things like hiking. This is a very, very relevant real world experience, and people that increase their agility, which also happens to improve your coordination and your balance, can even prevent things like falling off of a curb or stepping off of a sidewalk, and the difference between spraining your ankle and being able to catch yourself. There are very functional applications to why these types of exercises can be so dang important outside of the gym and not just inside of the gym. And it's one of the reasons that not only do I love it from that perspective, but it's also so fun. Like, tell me when the last time you whipped out an agility ladder was, or a cone drill, God forbid. Like, these are things we don't think about anymore because we're not athletes anymore. So we're like, okay, well, we don't have a cone setting up a T drill or a 3-cone drill for us, so why would we do it? What's the point? What is the purpose of this drill? We don't need it anymore. And you know what? Maybe you don't need it anymore, but god damn it, is it so fun. So again, this is where it comes to, sometimes you want athletic adaptations, even if you don't have a specific sport that you're trying to translate it into. It's just fun. It's so fun. Now, something that I've talked about on the internet and people are always like, what is that? Is conditioning. When we are thinking about the conditioning differences between training like an athlete and training like a bodybuilder, it's pretty substantial. So when we think about conditioning, you guys can think about this from the perspective of cardio conditioning. So this is like going on a run, going on a jog, going on a bike ride. That's cardio conditioning, where you're keeping your heart rate elevated at a certain intensity for a certain period of time. Okay? That's very traditional conditioning. You can also think of conditioning in other ways in terms of, like, when you break down the definition of conditioning, let me just explain this. When you break down the definition of conditioning, it's how well can you execute your movements and then how well can you recover from them. So the example could be running for 20 minutes. How well can you run for 20 minutes and how well can you recover from it? But it could also be, if you have a circuit of 4 exercises, it could be how well are you able to execute the quality of the movements, the speed of the movements, the power of the movements, and then how well are you able to recover in your rest period before going on again? Are you able to sustain that same intensity, or do you need to increase your conditioning to improve your conditioning to be able to better withstand your endurance or your stamina throughout the course of the circuit? So there's like a couple ways you can think about conditioning, but at the end of the day, it's getting your body to elicit a specific adaptation that you want it to be able to do. Again, for a bodybuilder, for a gym rat, they just want that dang good physique. They want to look good when they leave the gym. Outside of the gym, they want to feel great in their body. So what they're thinking about is typically using conditioning from the lens of what's going to help me reduce fat, what's going to help me stay lean, that's what's going to help promote this certain physique that I'm going for. When you're thinking about training like an athlete and the conditioning responses that you might want to get from your workouts, this is where the world expands a lot. So for conditioning, you can have the same thing. Maybe you want fat loss, maybe you want your physique to look really good, and you can use conditioning to support those goals. But since you're an athlete and you have more performance-based goals, this is where you want to get more specific into the things you want your body to be able to do. So if you are a casual 42-year-old mom and you want to be able to go on that neighborhood hike with your kids, you live in beautiful Arizona, that's where I used to live, and you live right by, what was it, South Mountain Trails? I think that's where I lived. So you guys have like 13 beautiful hiking trails right at your disposal, and you just want to be able to go with your teenage kids. Like, they never want to spend time with you anymore. And you know that when you have them on a hike, you actually get to have nice, deep, meaningful conversations. So specifically, you want to be able to keep up with your kids on that hike. Your kids are young athletes. They're feeling good in their bodies. They got all the energy in the world because they're these young pups, and you want to be able to keep up. So for example, in that case, when you want your body to be able to keep up with your 14-year-old kids outside of the gym, that's a conditioning response where we want to have endurance. We want to be able to sustain our energy for a long period of time without getting too tired, without getting too winded, and mind you, with having the cognitive capacity, the mental wherewithal to not be tripping over rocks and to be able to, step on a high rock, to be able to use our muscles for a long extended period of time. So when I'm thinking of somebody that has that type of goal, I'm like, okay, we probably want to keep their heart rate elevated for extended periods of time, like 20 to 30 minutes plus. So maybe for their workouts, we can either have them go for a long steady state cardio session, that's something that'll work, or maybe we have them do a circuit that they're doing 60-second intervals of 5 different exercises, and they do that for 4 to 6 rounds. There's different ways that you can elicit the same type of adaptation from your workout, but it's going to depend on the type of exercises that you like to do. It's going to depend on the type of workouts that you like to do. So for somebody else that is a 32-year-old soccer player, and she still plays competitive soccer, even though it's not for, a school or whatever anymore, but she knows that she wants to get faster, and she knows that she wants to be able to keep up because now she's kind of one of the oldest people on the team, and she knows that these young people are coming in and she wants to be able to hold her ground against them. I'm all here for that. Age is just a number in my world. So when I hear that, I go, okay, well, we definitely want to work on sprint drills and speed drills with her. That means we want to work on max explosive power, and that means that we want to be working in short intervals with longer periods of rest, because my girl needs to be able to have a max sprint capacity. That means she needs to practice using all of her effort in a sprint to get the best adaptation out of that possible. So the 42-year-old mom that wants to be able to go hiking with her kids and keeping up with the 14-year-olds that play sports all day, and she just wants to be able to keep up with them on the trail, she's going to have a very different conditioning type of workout than the girl that is the 32-year-old soccer player that just wants to be able to run faster to be able to keep up with the 25-year-olds on her soccer team. So you can see where a bodybuilder kind of has a blanket goal that they're training for, whereas athletes have specific goals depending on what they want their body to be able to do outside of the gym, not just inside of the gym. So conditioning typically means getting your energy systems, the things that can sustain your body for a short period of time at a high intensity or a long period of time at a lower to medium intensity. Those are different ways to train your conditioning responses at the gym. Whereas a bodybuilder doesn't even necessarily need conditioning or cardio. When I was bodybuilding, I didn't use it at all. I think it's great when people use it, and oftentimes they use it for, additional fat loss purposes, but it's not a necessary component of their training. But athletes, their lungs, their heart has to be able to keep up with the demands of what they want their body to be able to do. Now, the final difference I want to go over between these two is actually a lot more of a commonality than a difference, but it does come out in a little bit of a different way. It's the mindset between these two methodologies. So when you have the athlete, you're thinking of the very typical champion mentality. You're thinking of somebody that has the drive and the desire to win and to be the absolute best at their sport and to perform to the absolute best ability of their capacity, and they will not stop until they get where they want to go. Now, this is actually very similar to a bodybuilder, to a competitive bodybuilder, because a bodybuilder has the exact same goals. They're like, yeah, I also want to get the leanest physique. I also want to be able to compete in a bikini competition. I want the absolute leanest physique and best tonality because that's what's going to make me feel happy and feel accomplished with my workouts at the gym. So both of them are working towards this very difficult goal to achieve. Both of these are very hard-working disciplines. People have to work very hard to achieve any level of success in both of these disciplines. But you'll notice an athlete's mindset, because it's more focused on performance, it tends to be more focused on, I've got this, I can do this, what more can I do to become an even better version of what I'm trying to accomplish? And what I found from a lot of gym rats and bodybuilders is a bit more of a comparison mentality, where you're like, okay, well, I don't look perfect yet, so this is freaking me out a little bit, I need to work harder, God, I just don't like the way I'm looking. One is more, how can I elevate myself to a higher level? And the other one is also, how can I elevate myself? But there is a lot of comparison traps in the process while you're doing it. The train like an athlete world tends to build more of a team mentality. Everybody's rooting for each other. And the gym rat bodybuilding world tends to be a lot more comparison. I know not everybody's going to like to hear that, and I already can hear the people that are frustrated being like, the bodybuilding community is the nicest, best community I've ever been a part of. That's fantastic. I'm so happy for you. I also noticed that there were an incredible community of people in the bodybuilding community when I also did that. And I will say the comparison game is so strong internally in that culture that it is very, very, very hard to overcome that without some external help to get past that comparison that you are constantly putting on yourself. So I don't want that to be a big knock against the bodybuilding world, but that is the biggest reason that I ended up transitioning from bodybuilding into training like an athlete, is because I needed more of the encouragement model, and the comparing myself to people all the time was not good for me. So to each their own here, but make sure you understand what you're training for and the mentality that's going to come with that if you're trying to be successful in either of these worlds. Now, I just spent this entire episode going over the differences between training like an athlete and training like a bodybuilder, but at the end of the day, the way that these two disciplines complement each other so much has so much capacity to create such a well-blended relationship between these two. So training like an athlete, there is such a benefit for having certain times where you're focusing on hypertrophy, or where you're trying to elevate the strength of very specific muscle groups where you'd want to be using more isolated muscle exercises maybe, because that's going to help you increase your strength in this area, that's going to help you prevent injuries in this area, and it's also going to help some of those smaller muscles that don't get as much love and attention. You can really elevate them with those isolated muscle group exercises and help them really get to a point where they can support your body and prevent injuries along the way. So isolated exercises definitely play a role in the world of training like an athlete. And also, athletes do want to look good. I know most people want their body to reflect all the hard work they're putting in it. So finding a good balance between the functional qualities of an athlete qualities, such as the strength and the power and the agility and the conditioning, with hypertrophy or with size and physique. Really great idea to find the balance there, just from a perspective of making you feel the best overall, most confident version of yourself that you can. And from a bodybuilding perspective, taking some of those qualities of training like an athlete and mixing it into their workouts is definitely a good idea, just from an overall wellness perspective, because you can focus on that mobility and that prehab, because that's going to be crucial for bodybuilders. There's so much repetitious, isolated movements in bodybuilding that can cause an overuse injury sometimes. So focusing on mobility and prehab can be so beneficial for bodybuilders, just to feel better, to be less stiff, and to move better outside of the gym. Also bringing over some of that conditioning focus, just so that you don't look absolutely jacked and absolutely fantastic, but then you can't walk up a flight of stairs without feeling like you just climbed Mount freaking Everest. You want your lungs to be able to support you too. It is not just about how you look. Having functional adaptations from your workouts into the real world, outside of just the gym setting, outside of just sitting on a machine and doing 4 sets of 12, is going to be so beneficial for your overall wellness, just like living in the world. So while you hear me talking all the time about the differences between these two, I think that there is a lot of importance in learning how to blend them together, but finding a way where these two disciplines can live in unity, can complement each other, and you can get the absolute best training adaptations out of each one, depending on how you use it in your workout program. While it's not always the easiest thing in the world, finding the ways to balance these two disciplines, there is absolutely a way to do it. It's something that I've been working on and perfecting for the last 6 years now, ever since I started training like an athlete and bringing that into my practice and into what I do with my clients. So there is a way to do it. Keep listening to understand more ways to do it. And if you have specific questions about how to do it, do not hesitate to ask on the comments of this video. I would love to hear from you. If you liked this episode and you found it beneficial, make sure to share with anybody that you want to understand the difference between training like an athlete and between training like a bodybuilder, because they're not the same thing. And that's not a bad or a good thing. It's just a fact. They're not the same thing. Training like an athlete is based in strength and conditioning. Training like a traditional gym rat is based in bodybuilding. They're different. They're not the same discipline. You're not going to find Mr. Olympia getting hired as a strength coach for the New England Patriots, but you're also not going to find the strength and conditioning coach for the New England Patriots training the future Mr. Olympia. They are different, they have different focuses, and they're both amazing and incredible in their own ways, but they have different adaptations. So figuring out which one aligns best with you is going to be so important. So if you know somebody that is maybe a little bit lost in their training, they're a bored bodybuilder right now, like I was, and you just can't get why you are not getting lit up and excited by the gym, maybe it's because the way you train. Maybe you need to change the ways that you are using your body and pushing it and challenging it at the gym to elicit more joy out of your workouts and to feel more aligned. Maybe you do need to whip out the agility ladder and get used to doing agility and cone drills again. Maybe you do want to go sprinting at a track. Maybe you're sick of doing bicep curls and you just want to know what it's like to do an overhead slam with a medicine ball. There's so many different ways that you can train your body at the gym, and just thinking you can only train as a gym rat or a bodybuilder is doing yourself such a disservice. So send this to somebody that needs it. Like this episode if you found it helpful. Please subscribe because it helps so much. I had no idea how much it helped until I started running my own podcast and my own channel. Thank you guys so much for being here on day 3 of the 10-day series, and I will see you tomorrow for day 4. Coach KP is out. I will see you tomorrow, team.